Welcome to the 2020 Mama Summit. My name is Ebony Taylor, and I'm the Michigan Executive Director of Mothering Justice. For those of you who are new to our work, Mothering Justice was started in an effort to empower mothers to influence policy on behalf of themselves and their families, mothers of color, by the way. It is important to us that mothers are included in the conversation in the conversations that policymakers are having because their decisions impact us all. This year's summit focuses on making policy accessible to everyone by explaining the tricky language often used while also teaching you all how to advocate for yourselves. Thank you for being here, and we hope you not only learn something new, but that you're also motivated to join us and help make changes. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Danielle Slaughter, who is going to take us into the program. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you, Ebony, for that welcome. Good morning, everyone. This year's summit is all about making policy accessible, and we wanted to start off with a motivating keynote for mothers, or all parents, I should say, around activism and why we need to be active so that our little ones learn early. So our first keynote speaker for today is Ms. Kenria Rankin. Kenria is a writer, a host, and a consultant. She's also, I should have said, an award-winning author, sorry. And she's an on-air talent who creates dynamic, high-impact content that amplifies the lives, experiences, advocacy, and work of people of color. And she focuses on shifting the narrative around who deserves liberation, justice, joy, and dignity in America. And before I pass it on to Kenria, I want to say that my introduction to her was through a book that she edited on Black fatherhood. And I was so impressed with her work that I continued following her. I think that book came out in 2013, maybe? I don't know. I know I was a new mom, and someone told me about it, and I had to jump on that bandwagon because Black fatherhood is so important, and I wanted my uncle to know what he meant to me. I remember getting an autographed copy of that book for him. So, without further ado, we're going to pass it on to Kenria and let her get started. If you have questions or comments, please put those in the chats, and when she finishes, I will pass it along.
Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I feel like I gotta deliver, so let's make it happen. Good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to start the day with y'all, and I'm really excited about what y'all are here to do today and tomorrow. I know that y'all, we can't all see each other or necessarily hear each other, but I want you to take a minute and give yourself a little round of applause and a little pat on the back for making time today, because I know y'all don't really have it to invest in yourself and in your families and in your community. So I'm applauding y'all too. And then I want to give the organizers a round of applause for making all of this happen. Like, they got me to wake up at a decent time on a Saturday, and my kid is with her dad. That's not a thing that I do when she's not here. So applause to them for making this happen. Okay, so I was hoping I'd be able to see y'all, but I think we're gonna have to use good old fashioned tools. Can people raise their hands on here? I'm hoping, or you can drop in the chat. But I want you to raise your hand if at any point in your life you were a latchkey kid, like I was. Okay, I can't see y'all. If you can drop a yes in the chat so I can see if you are. I'll give y'all a second. So I started out with being a latchkey kid when I was just 5 years old. My daddy, who was my primary parent, handed me a key, and it was on a woven turquoise lanyard. And I wore it around my neck, and he told me that this was my key, and I was responsible for it, and that I was also responsible for letting myself in the house every day after half-day kindergarten. It's a lot. I was 5. We lived in a suburb of Cleveland from the Midwest. And at the time, it didn't really seem like he thought twice about making me a latchkey kid. And I definitely didn't. I was just excited that I was no longer going to be stuck waiting outside for somebody to come home or at a neighbor's house, like down the street, on the days when nobody was able to be home in order to meet me when I climbed off of Miss Cindy's yellow school bus. But as an adult who has had lots of therapy, remembering that day literally makes my stomach hurt. Every day I would open the door, I dropped my book bag by the door just as I came inside on our old brown carpet. It was the 80s. I grab a snack and I turn on a little TV that was perched on top of the big old floor model TV. I'm showing my age. It didn't work anymore, but it was the perfect size to put another TV on top of. And I sit on the living room floor and I would just watch cartoons until somebody came home. And at the time, it felt like an adventure. But when I look back, I was lonely. I was 5. I was sitting by myself at night or all day. And I can't even imagine my 9-year-old, I call her baby girl. There's no way I can imagine her doing all of that, like even at 9. Like, first of all, I wouldn't even trust her little tail with a key to my house. I feel like it would end up in her homegirl's book bag or in somebody's yard because she was swinging it around on her way home or something. But second to all of that, like, my little girl gets freaked out and cries when I do stuff like run downstairs to take out the garbage. Like, it's not a task I necessarily zoom through because these days I'm just excited to have the sun on my face for a second since we've been on like serious lockdown here. But I'm maybe gone for like 2 minutes tops. And there's no way the baby girl can handle letting herself in, not burning down the house, not being scared, and not FaceTiming me with tears on her face every single day. And the reality is, like, she shouldn't have to, just like I shouldn't have had to. And so, as an adult who has had lots of therapy and is now a mama, and I've gained some perspective and some empathy, I also now understand that what to my kindergarten self seemed kind of cool was likely a very tough decision for my dad. He was my primary parent, as I said, and he was struggling financially, I know now, to keep us in a house in a district that had excellent schools. And there just wasn't any money for me to go to daycare or have a babysitter. He probably figured, I'm guessing, because he's a very stoic kind of guy, but that it was better to have a plan that allowed me to be safe in our home than to have me looking for a friendly neighbor, right? Like, if my mom didn't come home or he couldn't walk off the job without risking his job in order to come care for me. And I know that we weren't the only ones in that position. Like, there's at least a few of you who were latchkey kids too, perhaps not as young as I was, but definitely, being forced to take care of yourself in that kind of a situation. And people like us, people whose parents had to make really tough choices about childcare, people who are often still forced to make tough choices about childcare, I think we know that safe and affordable care is tough to come by. And for those who have less privilege than I do, as someone who was working from home since my child was born and was able to fit in a couple of nights with a babysitter in my budget every month before the pandemic, I know that affordable and safe childcare is often out of reach. Every single day, wonderful parents are forced to choose between putting food on the table for their children and having a place to send them while they earn the money that pays for that food. There are things that I know now as a grown woman who writes books about race and racism and health and talks cash shit on a literary erotica podcast for Black women and non-binary folks, and is blessed to be somebody's mama. But before I was a 39-year-old mama who talks cash, of a child who talks cash shit to me for being busy all the time, I was a 20-something-year-old who was afraid to be a mom. Sorry, I'm not seeing I feel like I got disconnected.
We can hear you.
Okay, cool. So I'll back up. Before I was a 39-year-old mama of a 9-year-old who talks cash shit to me for being busy all the time, I was a 20-something-year-old who was legit scared of being a parent. I was traipsing around Harlem. I was fresh out of Howard. My hair was short and relaxed within an inch of his life. My belly was still hella flat. My feet could still tolerate heels for more than like an hour at a time. But there was a battle raging inside me. On one hand, I longed to one day, but not that day, be somebody's mama. I wanted to like sniff little heads covered in springy dark hair and munch on tiny little soft fingers whenever I wanted. But that meant I had to get my own kid because it's kind of creepy to do that to other people's babies all the time. But on my other hand, I was scared. I didn't have the easiest childhood, and I've written a lot about how my dad raised me, like Danielle was saying in the book that first connected us. And that's awesome, but the flip side of my dad raising me is that my mama wasn't really able to be there for me in the same way. And so I spent a whole lot of time taking care of myself and my little sister. So that meant that I manned the stove when my dad was at work. I washed clothes. I did a really shitty job, like mopping the black and white towel on the kitchen floor, and I still can't mop worth a damn. I'm not good at it. But there was a part of me deep in that young flat belly that was afraid that not having my mother in all the ways that I wanted her would prevent me from being able to give my own children what they needed. I was afraid that I repeat cycles that I wanted out of, quite frankly. And I didn't want my future children to shoulder the type of responsibility that was heaped on me at such a young age. I didn't want them to find me lacking and end up afraid to further our lineage. And at that point, I hadn't heard of the concept of generational trauma, which I know very well now. But essentially, I was afraid of what our past could mean for the future of anyone who actually trusted me to be their parent. But therapy is life changing. And eventually, I was able to get some tools and some perspective that helped me to feel like I could be a wonderful mama when the time came. But that confidence that I was finally able to bring to the table doesn't mean that it's not hard. As I said earlier, I've enjoyed the privilege of working from home and for myself since 2008 when I got laid off from a magazine. And every time I had to write a cover letter that was like full of forced enthusiasm, I realized I didn't really want to work for anybody else. I also realized that I'm not really made to work with somebody looking over my shoulder, although what I know now is that having a kid in your house is exactly that. But anyway, I work for myself, and it's been life-changing for me in a lot of ways, but it also means that there's no such thing as paid leave or employer subsidized insurance to catch us when we fall ill. I'm also a single mama, which means that I'm doing it all without much help. And if I don't work, I don't get paid. And if I don't get paid, then we don't eat. Like there's no wiggle room there, just period, that's it. And so 3 weeks ago, baby girl who is in virtual class abandoned her Zoom meeting in that room over there. And she pops into the kitchen where I'm working, which is right here where I'm sitting. And she said that her throat felt tight. Then came the fever and the stomach pain and all the things that come after that. But y'all, this kid has been sick no fewer than 3 times since we've been in isolation. And we started in mid-March, and we've taken it really seriously because I spent most of this time being my best friend's primary caretaker while she battled breast cancer. So like we didn't go nowhere. We still don't. We wear masks, we wear gloves, we do the whole thing. But she still managed to get sick. And every time I panicked, just thinking maybe she had contracted coronavirus on like 1 of the 4 days a month that she's with her dad. But every time her pediatrician soothed me, calmed me down, said it was probably not that. But this last time he said, yeah, let's go ahead and swab her for COVID. My child's face crumpled, and so did my heart. Like she wasn't even trying to hear that it was just a precaution and that getting the test didn't mean that she didn't have it. She just knew that she was scared that COVID was in the same sentence as her name, right? So luckily, they only had to swab just inside of her nostril. I guess they have a test that works for kids. It doesn't have to go way up. So there was no pain, but it took us a whole bunch of talking to get her to consent to us touching her that day. And it also took an entire morning of getting her burning body out of bed, carrying her down all 17 stairs to the car, driving across town trying to avoid bumps and potholes because they made her feel worse, dragging her inside, talking her down from her fear while internally talking myself down from fear, and doing the whole thing in reverse until she was back home on the couch, wrapped up in her Doc McStuffins blanket that my sister made her back when that was her favorite show. She still holds on to that blanket. And along the way, I was coughed on, I was vomited on because parenthood, and I was also trying to hire or answer client emails every time I stopped at red lights and worrying about the manuscript that I had that was due the next day because it wasn't going to copy edit itself, but my hands were obviously full. And as I said, if I don't work, I don't get paid. And, I say all that to say that it was rough. And I know y'all been there, trying to balance a sick kid and work at the same time. And ultimately, her COVID test was negative, but she was sick, right? So I spent the rest of the day and the week working with my left hand while stroking her burning hot head in my lap with my right. I couldn't stop working completely because bills, but I also never lost sight of the fact that it's a privilege that my work that week consisted of me just letting her lie on me while I edited and like taking out one-handed emails to reschedule my meetings. I didn't really have to leave the house except for to pick up meds, like after we went to the doctor. But our family who can't care for their children without risking their jobs were never far from my mind. And, I just was thinking, like, what if their kid actually tested positive for COVID, right? Or what if they did? Without earned paid sick time to take care of themselves and their children, they risk being fired or infecting other people. And those are both impossible choices, but they're forced by a country and states and companies that ultimately don't give a shit about our lives. If they did, we'd have services in place that actually serve us. But instead, each budget cycle, we see local, state, and federal officials punch holes in the safety net that are big enough for entire communities to slip through. Budgets for Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program, which ensure 36 million children nationwide, get slashed every year. And the USDA even tried to kick 700,000 people out of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, at the start of COVID, like when we needed the most. And what's crazy is like, that's an improvement. Last year, 45 administration proposed rules that would have taken food out of the mouths of 3.1 million people. Now, more than ever, we need groups like the Michigan Safety Net Coalition, which Mothering Justice works with to provide cash and in-kind support for vulnerable families in the face of economic and other crises. Over the 7 months that we've been officially and simultaneously battling the coronavirus and police violence, which both disproportionately kill Black people like me, mutual aid groups have really gone into overdrive collecting and redistributing money for families who are in need. When the folks who we've trusted with this responsibility of our collective caretaking show zero interest in doing what they're supposed to do, it's up to us to rush in and weave our own safety nets. And we are in so many creative and community-based ways. And I actually get back to that a little bit later. Because first, I gotta say, I'm supposedly writing my 6th book right now. And I say supposedly because I'm overwhelmed. Like, I have all these things that are on my plate. I'm taking care of my kid. I'm working for clients because I am an editorial consultant, helping nonprofits do the work of racial equity and, help under-resourced and underserved communities. And so I say supposedly because I'm doing all of that stuff. And so my book is like a masterpiece of minimalism at this moment. But whenever it's done, it's going to be called Complex Saviors. And it chronicles the ways that racism threatens the lives of Black women and girls. And I think even more importantly, the ways that we save ourselves. So I'm currently, technically, working on a chapter about pregnancy. And it's been a really tough one, honestly, because it dives into abysmal facts like this one. Black people in the United States are 243% more likely to die during pregnancy or in a year after the end of pregnancy than our white counterparts. We can control for all the things that some folks think will protect us from racism, like income and location and education and age, but the reality is that none of that eliminates the gap. Another fact, about 10 to 15% of all pregnancies end in miscarriage, which is defined as a loss of a pregnancy before the end of 20 weeks of gestation. But Black people are 57% more likely to miscarry than white folks. Another, preterm births, which is when a baby decides to make an appearance before 37 weeks, make up 10% of all births, but are responsible for 70% of all perinatal deaths, which are stillbirths and deaths within the first week of life. Black babies, our babies, are nearly twice as likely to be born premature as white babies and 3 times more likely to die from it. So what does that really mean, right? It means that in 2018, 6,760 Black babies didn't live to see their first birthdays. I'm gonna let that sink in. That's 6,760 empty cribs, 6,760 little heads, and 6,760 sets of tiny soft fingers that aren't here anymore for me to munch on. That's 6,760 families who are missing their little loves and suffering the kind of pain that I know each and every one of us as a parent can imagine, even as we pray that it never visits us. But I came closer to it than I would like back in 2011. So baby girl, the cash shit talking 9-year-old, wasn't breathing when she was born. The umbilical cord had wrapped itself around her little neck, and the seconds that it took the midwife and like the emergency team, it literally seemed like they materialized out of nowhere to get her to breathe and to cry, are among the most harrowing moments of my life. Like in those moments, the only real sound was me like asking repeatedly, loudly, hysterically, why isn't she crying, right? Like that's all I wanted to know, and nobody was answering because everybody was like hovered over her. But in that moment, those statistics just flashed through my mind. Like, I didn't know if I would survive if I had to leave the hospital without a baby that I've been carrying for 39 weeks. And so when she was finally laid on my chest, all spindly little limbs and big old eyes looking right at me, like relief flooded through my body. And the experience of birthing her, which involved 9.5 hours of labor alone, that's just the first part of it, the last 5 hours in the hospital, but just like wandering around my house by myself and eating green grapes in between contractions. That experience really inspired me to train as a birth and postpartum doula while also pursuing a divorce. I didn't want anyone else to feel unsupported during their labor, and this was a way for me to be of use. What we know is that having a doula, someone who provides continuous physical, emotional, and educational support both before and during and also after childbirth, improves birthing outcomes and gives families everything from lower incidences of C-sections to higher APGAR scores in the minutes after delivery. And I'm really proud to say that in the year since baby girl was born, I've helped many families come through the birthing process whole. It's a blessing that I get to be with families during their most intimate moments, and my phone is like full of pictures of my little babies. So when I started planning this book, Complex Saviors, it was really important to me to lift up the work of Black doulas who are helping to save babies nationwide. One of those doulas is a woman named Kristen Farmer Kane, and she's the CEO of an organization called Birthing Beautiful Communities. It's a nonprofit that provides free doula care for folks in Cleveland, where I grew up. And they have a 99.8% infant survival rate. Like, she's quite literally saving Black babies. And that alone would be amazing. But the thing that really moved me about Kristen's work is her dedication to advocating for populations that are often left out of the birthing conversation. So the best available data shows that every year, nationwide, about 1,400 people are pregnant when they're booked in state and federal prisons. And in the year where folks were tracked, because this data is really hard to come by, 753 of them birthed their children behind bars. So states get to set their own policies around how those families are treated in facilities, right? And so in many of them, parents to be are forced to labor and deliver their children while shackled. Is a practice that is decried by medical pros who warn that it can stand in the way of necessary care. It can cause injuries and falls. It can create the conditions for deadly blood clots. And I think probably most obviously, right, it harms the general well-being of somebody who's just trying to have their child and then safely care for them when they're born. So Kristen and her organization moved beyond the already important work that they were doing of providing support and education for pregnant and postpartum folks who are incarcerated in Cuyahoga County to embody the ethos of mothering justice. Kristen turned to civic engagement, which is what we want y'all to do to tackle that particular bit of government-created cruelty. She lobbied at the local level and then at the state level to end the shackling of incarcerated pregnant people in Ohio from conception through delivery. The bill passed the state Senate at the end of last year, and it's waiting a vote in the State House of Representatives now. And I'm just so excited for what Kristen and other advocates like her are doing around the country as they work really hard to save all of our lives and the lives of our children, especially those who have the most marginalizations heaped and oppressions heaped on their shoulders. But for real, can I be really honest? Like, I'm tired of saving myself. And I feel like y'all probably are too. Like, that's why my book is called Complex Saviors. Black women are constantly put in positions where we have to be our own and often our only advocates. And that's complex. That's why it's called Complex Saviors. So on one hand, I revel in having the opportunity to lift up the work of people like you who step outside of themselves to fight for the greater good. But my other hand is exhausted. She knows that we deserve rest and security and joy. She knows that our children deserve to see us rest and to know that their lives are just as valued as folks who don't have to fight every day to convince the world that they matter. But being weary has never been a reason to stop fighting. In this moment, just like in ones that our ancestors encountered, we have to be not strong. I actually really hate that strong Black woman shit, but we have to be imaginative and we have to be focused. So my fifth book, How We Fight White Supremacy, A Field Guide to Black Resistance, centers on freedom dreaming. And it's a concept that pushes us to close our eyes and imagine a just world where we all take care of each other. It's an exercise that grounds me on the days when I have to stop and pray for a Black person whose name I should never know. Oh boy, I just saw the chat. Delightful. But it's now a hashtag on my timeline. It's, it works on the days when I'm at a loss for words because I know that words alone cannot keep us afloat when racism seeks to tie us down. I want you to do that exercise with me right now as you get ready to dig into this summit. So, for just 20 seconds, I want everyone here who can hear the sound of my voice to close your eyes. And then for those 20 seconds in your own private dark, I want you to imagine a world that you want to create, starting now. Thank y'all for imagining with me. We have to use our collective energy and expertise and imaginations to remake the world and model for our kids what it means to be self-possessed in a land that was built on us being possessed by others. We have to do the daily, incremental, dirty, exhausting work of equipping the next generation with a world that will demand less of them. A world that will operate from a place that doesn't require them to beg for their humanity or affordable childcare or paid sick time off or life itself. A world that will let them rest, that will let them thrive, and that will let them be. Let's get it.
All right. Thank you so much, Kenra, for that amazing keynote. I just want to say that line of "I'm tired of saving myself" is just, that was so real. Tammy Jones says your remarks were brilliant.
Thanks, Tammy.
When is your book coming out? That's what I want to know.
Oh, listen, I gotta write.
I know that face.
Every
writer knows that face.
Yeah, supposedly. So I actually don't have to turn it in until February of 2022, but I'm an overachiever. And so I would like to have it done by the end of next summer so it can come out in spring of 2022.
Okay.
So that's the goal. Yeah, we'll see. God willing.
All right. Well, definitely keep me posted on that.
Okay.
Let's see. Tammy says, I love the idea of freedom dreaming, going to want to block. Oh, so we do have a little bit of time. If y'all, what would that look like though? Like freedom dreaming.
I think, I say this all the time. If we can't imagine the future that we want to have, how can we make it? And if we don't stop to sit in the reality of, and what we want to make our reality, and not be always caught up in the reactive cycle, right? Because what happens is the world is terrible and it's on fire. And so we spend all of our time trying to put out the fires instead of being able to take a moment and figure out what we want. And I think that if we don't do that, we're in danger of replicating the same systems that we already live in. So just taking that time on a regular basis, or, like I said, I literally will do this when there's a video that I have to scroll past really fast on Twitter that I can't, right? That happens all the time. I sit and I just think, okay, if this world were the world that I wanted, for one thing, I wouldn't have to do that, right? My child wouldn't be afraid when the police, we were taking a walk one day and we saw police stopped at someone's house and she freaked out and wanted to turn back the other way, like she's mine. She shouldn't have to live in a world where that's what she's afraid of, but also shouldn't have to keep things from her, right? And kids ain't stupid. Like, they see what's going on, they know what's happening in the world, and we should be having conversations that give them context and grounding and security in those moments. And a lot of that for me looks like us sitting together and saying, okay, so this is a situation that is negative and that feels detrimental and violent to us, so what's the opposite? How should it be? Yeah.
I like that. What's the opposite of this negative feeling in this moment? Oh God. I'm so sorry, y'all. We had this perfect outdoor adventure planned for them, and it's raining in Georgia because that's how the universe works when you make plans. Okay. Does anybody else have questions? No, I'm not seeing any more. Am I missing something? Sorry, all these things are buzzing at me. All right.
Well, I just want to say thank y'all for having me. This is lovely. I'm excited.
Thank
I
you
got to
so
talk.
much. Can you tell us a little bit about your podcast, though? You mentioned that briefly.
I can. So it's called The Turn On, and you can find it at theturnonpodcast.com and anywhere that you listen to podcasts. And my best friend Erica and I, every week, come on. I read a little bit of Black literary erotica using that voice. And then we have a conversation where we basically tell too much of our business. But the point is that we talk about sex while having sex while being Black. And we use it as a jumping off point to talk about all the other things that impact us, right? Sometimes people ask me, how do you sit your anti-racism stuff, next to an erotica podcast? And for me, I mean, my work centers around rendering us whole, right? And you can't be a whole Black person and leave out the joy and the pleasure. I want to show up as my whole self all the time, and that's a part of who I am. That is what I enjoy. And yes, as Don just said in the comments, like, we are complex beings. All of those parts make up who I am, and I can't arrive ready for the battle that we just talked about, for which I am weary, without having a little bit of fun before I get here. And when we have these conversations, we know that sex doesn't exist in a vacuum either, right? So we talk about sex and parenting and conversations about consent with our children. We talk about, what it means to feel safe when you're out on the streets or when you're dating, and how do you ensure that that happens as a person who's moving through the world, who people tend to think of as being weak and being prey. And then we also have interviews with people who write the books, who edit the books. We bring in experts. We just did an interview with a divorce attorney because we have some folks who listen to the show who wanted to know about the inner workings of things like that. We have sex therapists on. We have, anybody who we think people want to hear from. All of our guests are Black and are either non-binary or women. And it's important to us, which ties into my larger work, to always center the voices of people of color and other folks who are marginalized everywhere I go. And so, yeah, that's the show, The Turn On.
Awesome. I'll admittedly have not gotten into podcasts, and my friends keep trying to get me. And I've been a guest on podcasts, but I don't even go back and listen to myself. I don't know why.
That's nerve-wracking. I get it.
I keep trying to get into them, so I'm gonna have to check this one out, because I have a like obsession with historical fiction romance novels. Those are like my faves.
We got some of those.
And we
interviewed Beverly Jenkins too. She's on the show. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I read one of her books, and then she came on and talked to us about it, and it was amazing. She's fantastic.
Y'all, she's a Detroit native, for y'all who don't know.
And she's like an icon. Like,
I love her so much.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna have to go listen now. Or maybe if I treat it like an audiobook, then it won't.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just have a hard time with it. So thank you so much. If you missed parts of Kenria's speech today or her keynote this morning, these are all being recorded, and our wonderful video editor is going to put this on YouTube. Hopefully I haven't made it too difficult for them, but so they will be on YouTube, and we will send out emails when everything is up for y'all to go back and look over. This was amazing. We have a break until 11. So go get you some water, some tea, go give your kids some attention, like mine are standing outside my office begging for right now. And we will be back at 11 with a session on policy. This session will be right here in this room. You don't have to go to another link or anything like that, but we will have Gabriela Santiago Romero with us, and she will be breaking down policy in terms that everyone can understand. Because I need that, y'all. I don't know about y'all, but policy is not my jam. And so I am hoping that I will understand a little bit better what all those words are that they put in these amendments when we get ready to vote. All right, thank you so much. And we will see y'all back here shortly. Okay, so our next session is all about Policy 101, and it's going to be led by Gabriela Santiago Romero. She's an immigrant from Mexico, a Detroit native, and an active organizer in Michigan. She has spent her whole life fighting for justice and will bring her core value of putting people first to local government. Gabriela is currently the Policy and Research Director at a state-based movement organization. She pushes for statewide policy change that centers communities' basic needs in partnership with multiracial grassroots organizations in Michigan. Welcome, Gabriela, and thank you so much for agreeing to run this panel. I know that so many people are ready for it, myself included. All right, let's make sure you have sharing access, because I know you need to be able to share your screen. You should be able to. Is it allowing you to?
Oh, I can. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Cool. So then thank you so much, Danielle, for the introduction. Thanks everyone for being here. It's such an honor to be sharing space with brilliant mamas. I'm so excited. Mothers are powerful, I swear. The more I learn from my mom, the more I'm excited to potentially have that superpower. It's really great. And I'm here to hopefully inspire folks to get engaged in local policy, inspire folks to maybe get a little action in local politics, supporting maybe progressive candidates. But really what I'm here to do is start from the beginning. So as Danielle mentioned, policy sometimes can be pretty confusing. It can be, I believe, very disengaging. And I think that's on purpose. So I actually want to go back. I actually want to go even before we talk about policy, even before we talk about the laws. As a community organizer, I actually believe that power comes within. We have the power, we know the issues, we know the solutions. So I'm hoping to spend a little bit of time going over that first, structures and systems of power, while we go into the government and policy infrastructure and how we can create change. So I do have a little slide here. As an organizer, I feel like we always have these things, but this is an introduction, folks. This is really, I know that we want to know the words and the exact vocabulary, but I'm going to actually push back, and I'm going to say that those are tools from our oppressors. I'm going to say that those are tools that keep us from being able to engage in conversation with our family and with our friends, because those things are a lot of times need the law degree, a lot of times need the master's in policy. And I'm here to say that we don't need that. I'm here to say that actually what we need is to understand power, systems of power structures. We need to understand structures of government. And then we need to understand how to take action to create actual change in policy. So I hope that you all are cool with that. I can't see the chat. I did want to make this as interactive as possible, but since I am presenting on the slide, I'll try to wrap up within my time to leave some time for discussion and questions afterwards, which I'm super excited to dive into. So policy and why it matters and how to understand it. So before we go into that, again, I'll do a quick introduction of myself. We'll go over identities of self, systems of power, structure of government, and then how to take action for change, all within 30 minutes or so. So briefly, to introduce myself, I always introduce myself by the way, this is me and my mom. I think this was like a Halloween one day. We were dressed as cholas, but this is like in our apartment in Southwest Detroit. And I always start my story by sharing about us, about about the first time that I found out that I was poor. I was sitting at my kitchen table watching my mom, my beautiful mom, cook dinner for us. And I was in middle school and I was crying to her for new shoes. And I kept saying, Mommy, all the girls in school have the new Nikes. I want to look fresh too. Can you please buy them for me? She said, no, mija, you have everything that you need. And she was right. I had everything that I needed for school. I had a uniform, I had my shoes for school, but I couldn't understand why she couldn't just go to the store and buy me a new pair of shoes. And so I asked her, not knowing, I said, Mommy, are we poor? And she turned around and laughed and said, you didn't know we were poor? And no, I had no idea that we were poor, because growing up, there was always food on my table, our lights always worked, our heat was always on. And really, it was only later in life, when I started to understand systems, when I started to understand policy, that I realized when I was growing up, that was the 1990s. We were just, and I realized this again in grad school when I was learning policy, that during this time, President Clinton had a full-fledged war on welfare and welfare programs at the federal level. And this meant that now those programs are not what they used to be back then. For me growing up, we were able to receive WIC. We were able to receive milk and formula and diapers. My mom, who was undocumented, the laws here in Michigan were much more forgiving, were much more giving than they are now. And that all, again, has to do with power and who is in power and structures of systems. But me growing up, I had no idea that this was the case. But later in life, I realized that it was during the 90s that we were still fortunate to have bills that gave funding to low-income families, to single mothers. My mom was a single mother. All of these things that led to me and my family to live with dignity. When I share this story, there are many people who feel the same way, who were able to benefit from these systems, from these structures, from these programs. And then I realized that there were many other people who weren't able to receive these, who weren't able to receive funding because maybe they weren't just poor enough. They were poor, but they weren't poor enough. So to Danielle's point, what is the language? What are they saying? What they say really matters. And in those bills, I don't remember exactly how much the income was, but if it wasn't low enough, then you weren't able to receive services, which really makes it hard for a lot of our families, which is why they continue to struggle. So for me, my mom told me, go to school, get a good education so that you don't have to struggle as hard as I do, because she was. My mom, like I know many moms, woke up every single day, worked incredibly hard to pinch her pennies, to make sure that we had what we needed. And that was it. That's what it was. But she told me to go to school, to get my education so that I wouldn't have to struggle as much as she would, so that I wouldn't have to work as hard as she did, so that I could essentially leave and make it. And that's really the conversations that we're always having. And that's kind of, I believe, part of the problem. Us being told to like put ourselves up by our bootstraps, to get an education, to fend for ourselves, to take care of our families and nothing else. When in reality, we need each other. We need ourselves. We need our stories to understand systems of power, to understand what's keeping us back, to understand how to work together to get what we need. So how do we do that? I think before we do that, before we look into the laws and policies, you have to understand what the systems of power are. So I'm going to try to go through this very briefly in the next 10 minutes before ending with what we can do about this. So I don't think that this is new for any of us. I think that this is like, yeah, water is wet. There is white supremacy. There is capitalism. There is patriarchy. But what does this mean? Under these systems of power that we currently live in, Black, brown moms, queer, non-binary folks, we live under a white supremacy culture. We live, and this stems racism, it stems nationalism, right? Everyone has to be a citizen. It stems to Christian dominance, which then this Christianity, all of this is so well connected to capitalism, right? And then classism, so like who who has a good family, who's in good standing, capitalism and ageism and ableism, who's able to work certain jobs to be able to receive funding. I know that the first keynote speaker mentioned she has to work all of the time in order to survive. But what if you are differently abled and you're not able to do that? Under a capitalistic system, you won't be able to survive. And then again, of course, we have the patriarchy, the father figure, the sexism that we have always surrounding us. All of these systems maintain control, and all of these systems say what is true and what is right. And these are often very binary, right? They are at the expense of others. These systems are at the expense of me and my family who are immigrants, of me who's a queer brown woman that grew up in poverty. These things all, they all matter. In the middle of all of these systems, we have people. We have people like you and me. We have people that work in institutions like governments. We have people that create culture, which I'll show a really beautiful video at the end of some of the culture that we're trying to create. And we have a society that we're currently living in. So all of these things lead the culture that we live in, the institutions that surround us, the society that we're living in. All of these things become self-internalized. So the white supremacy, the capitalism, the patriarchy, all of it is we all take that with us. So that means that we are in this cycle of socialization. Before going into the cycle of socialization, I do see I was able to pull up the chat. So please feel free to share any insights, share any reflections, share any thoughts that come up as we're sharing this, because there are many other visuals coming up. So we live under these systems. We are in the middle. We are very much being touched by these systems, so that we are now entering the cycle of socialization. So how does the cycle of socialization start? It starts at birth, y'all. It starts at the very beginning when we're born. We have no conscience. We have no idea what's going on in society. For me, in my case, I was born into a family of poverty in Mexico. No idea what was going on. Then immigrated to the States when I was 1. Still not my choice. No idea what's going on. But then dropped into a country, into a society that again upholds capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy. And I have very limited information about who I am, where I come from, and what that means for myself and my family, my community. So this isn't our fault, but it's important for us to realize that this is something that happens. We have limited information. We don't understand the stereotypes. I didn't understand what people were saying when they called me a wetback. I had no idea what was going on when they said, go back to your country. These are all things that we are hit with, which honestly at the core, all of these things are taught at a very personal level. So it was my teachers who would look at me funny when I wasn't speaking English. It was my classmates who knew that I was Mexican, who were like, you don't belong here. And all of these things at the core really are fear of other people, fear of immigrants. There's an ignorance that is brought in by the society that we live in. There's confusion. There's communities that should be supporting each other that are confused, that are actually fighting each other. So that leads to a lot of insecurity. Wouldn't the world look so much better if Black and Brown Alliance and solidarity was a thing, was an actual thing to create the change that we wanted? So we're socialized, and this spheres our expectations, our norms, our values, our roles, and models and ways to be. So to be completely honest, the way that we are socialized, we, meaning me, maybe many of us on this summit trying to learn more, we're not told that we have the power that we need, that how to navigate this system, how to question it, right? If anything, it's just constantly reinforced. It's being constantly reinforced by institutions, by the culture, again, by our society. So these are reinforcement messages in our churches. A lot of times, We hear a lot of negativity in schools and television. Immigrants are here taking over our jobs. Black men are criminals in the legal system. When you're too poor to pay for a parking ticket, then you stay in jail. So what does that mean for us in our humanity and our value? In our practices. So in songs, in language, and all of this, these are just constantly reinforced. These are constantly things that we never really question. But again, the core of it is fear, it's ignorance, it's confusion, it's the insecurity. And this continues to discriminate us by disempowering us. Some people are granted privilege rather than others. I know that I had a lot of privilege by having a master's degree, by having a business degree. I've been rewarded for things where I could have chosen to continue on this path where I'm just constantly gathering privilege and ignoring everybody else, which is what a lot of people do, especially a lot of brown and Black people at one point who left the city of Detroit because they had to make it. This was the society that we lived in. You had to leave the city in order to make it. You had to get a degree and then leave to New York, Chicago, California, just leave this place. And that continues to disempower us in our society and in our communities. And I want to go ahead and say that we don't have to do that. That shouldn't be what we're doing. This results in us saying in silence, us not saying, hey, I'm a mom, I should be getting paid time off. Us being in guilt for not understanding policy and politics and government, like that we feel like it's our faults for not understanding these things. We then feel stressed out, we then feel self-hatred. All of these, anybody ever feel any of these things because of these systems and structure in society that we live in? I know that I did. I know that I've been constantly questioning and trying to figure out and saying, but wait, this feels wrong. I don't like that I have this bias against poor people on the street. I don't like that I feel it. Like, why do I feel this way? So it's really important that we question the silence and the anger, because the core, again, is fear and the ignorance. And we have two choices here. The choices are to the action is to do nothing, which is unfortunately, I think, what a lot of people do. They do nothing. They just continue to watch the news or maybe completely ignore the news and not question their anger or their fear or what's going on. And they continue to push the status quo. The other thing that we can do is that we can actually create change. And this is what we're all here to do. This is what I'm really excited for us to be doing together. We can start to question why it is that things are the way that they are. We can start to interpret things, start to reframe things. As mentioned, sometimes the law is written in a way that is so confusing, we don't understand it. That's okay. We can rephrase that. We can put our own language to law and policy, and that's kind of what I want to do here. We can educate ourselves. We can educate our family, and then we can use all of these things to go ahead and take a stand and to create some change. So again, here's another visual. By the way, I can totally share this out, this presentation out with folks. I can make it into a whole PDF and folks can take it. But here is the whole cycle of socialization. This is something that we all live in. Again, bottom left here, we're born into this world with little information. We are taught by others. We are taught to not trust Black and brown people. We are taught that whiteness is better than anything else and is more valuable. That's been taught, and that's not true, and that's not okay. But these things have been reinforced by, I live in Southwest Detroit and it's being gentrified. Me and my community, heavily immigrant, heavily Black, have always asked for streetlights. Suddenly, like two young white people move in and now we have streetlights and bike lanes. So there's a reinforcement, right, of who gets money, who in the budget gets what they want, who gets the policies that they want. And honestly, a lot of us, if we don't question it, it becomes an unconscious thing. It becomes like, oh yeah, like, you know, that's good, they finally have streetlights. For me, I'm like, yes, we finally have streetlights, but it shouldn't have taken 20 years for us to get streetlights. It shouldn't have taken white folks moving into my community for me to get streetlights. So this becomes dehumanizing for me. It makes me feel like I will never be able to achieve what I want, and that's not true. We are going to be able to achieve what we want. So briefly, we are all currently now in the cycle of liberation. This cycle of liberation does include policy advocacy, education, all of those things. But where we are right now is we're waking up. You are at the Mama Summit, you are trying to understand, you realize that there are things that are going wrong, that things are not okay, and now it's time to do something about it. So this is personal. This is before we even get to the laws and policies. This is personal. We gotta wake up. We gotta realize that something is wrong. We have to empower ourselves to be introspective, to educate ourselves. Oops, I went too far. To educate ourselves, to be real. It's taken me a super long time to be real about issues of racism, of issues of anti-Blackness in my own community, of issues of anti-LGBTQ issues in my community, but I had to be real. Why? Because when we're real, we can start to dismantle those. So we're going to be real about policies. Throughout this summit, you're going to have amazing speakers talk to you even deeper about specific policies. You're going to be able to dismantle that. You're going to be able to question it and try to understand it, reword it for yourselves, and develop, excuse me, and develop tools for change. And we'll go into those, what those can be a little later. As you get ready, which you're doing right now, you begin to reach out, which Mothering Justice has. Mothering Justice has reached out to other people to continue to seek experience, to share stories, to talk about the injustices, to begin to take some stands. And the core of this and what we're doing right now is we are living and standing in our power, which are our stories. Stories are incredibly powerful. They show the problem and the solutions. It's it's also rooted in self-esteem. So to be completely honest, I am not a policy wonk. I am not a lawyer. I do have a master's in policy and research. Higher education, y'all, I think it's a scam, because I was giving like a brief overview of what those things are. But I have the self-esteem to know that I can question, I can learn, I can unlearn, I can relearn, and then I can work with you in making sure that we're advocating for things. And that's what I want us all to have. I don't want us to believe that we have to get a master's or have to go to law school to understand these things. You are powerful just who you are. You have a story. Learn what that story is and reach out to others to start to build community. So we're starting to build community here in this space. This is your community. This is just the beginning of it, really. We are organizing, we're learning, we're gonna be taking some planning, some actions. And again, the core of this is being powerful. We're rooted in our self-esteem. And then we're gonna begin to create some change. I know that we're gonna talk about some policy issues today. We're gonna talk about like the infrastructure of government. Well, I'll go over that briefly, but we gotta maintain it with what are we gonna be doing campaigns? Are we shifting culture? Are we understanding policy more? Are we doing, I know for We the People, as mentioned, I work with We the People. I worked for an organization, which is We the People Michigan. And we have research pods where across the states, about 5 to 10 people in each region. Before COVID, we would come together and go over issues. A lot of it right now is housing in Michigan. And then we would begin to look over articles, interviews, and then pull the policy. For us, policy was last. For us, it was, what are the problems? What are the stories? What are the systemic issues that we know to be true? And then what are the solutions that we want to see in order to create policy that has the solutions that we want, so we can begin to create this change. We're going to be critically transforming institutions and creating new cultures. We'll go into how to do that. Again, we are now currently in this cycle of liberation. I'm super excited because we can do this, y'all. I believe that we can. So with my last 5 minutes, before going into any questions and conversation, where do we start? We can start with the basics. And I know that this might not, I don't think this is like the most fun thing for anybody. But it's important to know that there are 2 branches that we could go after. We have our federal government, and here we have, well, we have 2 levels, and then they each have 3 branches. The federal governments, which we're hearing about a lot right now, we have our legislative branch, which these are the folks that write the laws. We have the executive branch, who will put those into law. And then we have our judicial courts, and they're the ones that interpret the laws. They're the ones that interpret the laws. That the courts that essentially that also keep the laws in place, like by law, and they can either incarcerate you or give you whatever like any next steps that you have to do in order for you to respond to whatever the case may be that you're working with. So you can start here. You can start to understand federal government and state government. But honestly, I think that this means nothing unless we connect it to a real issue. So I started off talking about growing up being poor and not knowing what was going on. I would say start here. I would say look back to your story, to your life. What is it in your life that you know you want to learn more? What is a policy you want to understand some more? For me, I was actually in class in grad school at U of M in Ann Arbor when I was learning about policies that my family benefited from. So it was really eerie to hear how things were passed and how I know directly that money was like fed into my family, but then also realizing that these bills or this program was also being gutted at the same time. And it's why we have the results that we have today. So I would honestly Google. Google's accessible. Google is easy. If you have internet access, I would start here. So I just Googled because I remember Bill Clinton from class. Bill Clinton was in office, and then there were welfare bills that I really wanted to learn about. So I Googled it, and when I did, there's a lot of information out here. So here we start to break down that it was Bill Clinton when he got into office that he was saying that he was going to begin to gut the welfare in America. Welfare in America started back in the 1930s. It really benefited a lot of Americans. It created a safety net. But if you scroll a little bit further down, I then read that a lot of these policies were really great. There is a
During his first
here.
100 days in office, FDR pushed an unprecedented slate of
We're going to stop there. But there was a paragraph that said, welfare programs were great and all, but people of color weren't able to access it. So that is important to me, right? That's important to all of us as we're talking about systems and structures and what this means for us. So I would start there. I would start with the basics, start with understanding basic structure, and then policies and where they are and what that means for us. So as when it comes to the welfare program, federal program that was gut and changed, Michigan, the state of Michigan actually decided to provide their residents a little bit more funding. So this is where it becomes important to know the difference between federal and states, which we can go into a little bit more if I have a little time at the end, but I want to keep going. So once we understand where a potential bill could be, if it's in the federal or the state level, this might be like super redundant and it might seem silly. It might make you think of like the song, like how to make a bill, but it's really, really important. And it's really important for us to know this diagram. It's important for us to know because these are all key points where we can insert ourselves in advocacy. So when the bills are either in the Senate or the House and they're being drafted, it's important for us to know which is it in the Senate or is it in the House. We can know those things. We can figure that quick Google search, figure that out. Because then maybe what we want to do with our people is go to the next step, which is to go to the committee, where they're going to be having hearings. Maybe we want to attend a hearing to say, actually, we need paid sick time because I can't do this on my own, and I need a little bit more to help me live with dignity. Whatever it is that we're trying to argue, it's important to us to know where in the diagram this falls. Again, this is for you to use and to have towards the end. So it matters that we understand cycles, that we understand the basics of what these systems are, and then to be completely honest, this is where we can take action. For me, where I have the most fun, and I'm going to wrap up very quickly, is going to the organizing. And the organizing we already talked about is learning and unlearning, educating ourselves, and working with others. So what it can look like is organizing organizing around issue campaigns for policy change. So one example of this that we know is one that Mothering Justice led, the Earn Paid Sick Time campaign, which led they collected signatures, so they worked together, they organized on the ground enough signatures to put earned paid sick time on the ballot in November. This was done by organizing, this was done by conversations. This wasn't necessarily done by looking at the law like by itself only. It happened by talking to our people. It happened by talking to moms, by sharing our stories, by understanding systems and power and structure. So it can look like lobbying. It can look like making sure that we're there once a bill is introduced, that we're making sure that it gets passed. Aside from this, aside from organizing and lobbying and following the policies, we all saw how incredibly important culture is and society. And I think right now a big part of our work is not just understanding policies, it's also understanding how to shift culture. So one of my favorite videos that I'm going to share right now is trying to do just that. So how do we shift culture from, this is a quick film showing solidarity, Black and brown solidarity, multiracial solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that we need more of these, more culture shifts like these, highlighting us and our work, highlighting moms, highlighting children, highlighting families, to really shift culture to getting what we want, which is more budgeting, more resources, more solutions. And then I'm gonna make sure the sound is on. All right. So culture shift, I think, is another super important part of our work. The other thing, the last thing that I would say here is supporting candidates, grassroots candidates. So I'm trying to leave you here with some hope, y'all. Like, this is happening. We are currently now shifting culture. We are shifting conversations. We are running our own progressive candidates. We're running amazing Black and brown moms that understand issues, that are going to be in the halls of power fighting for us, right? So it's possible, and you don't have to do this alone. So I know we have Mothering Justice here. We, the People Michigan, is an organization that will work together with you to organize on issues that align with our values. I know that we'll be hearing later from Ronell, who's incredible, who's with the Michigan League for Public Policy. ACLU is also really great. If you need any of these contacts, please do feel free to reach out. And here's my own, but I'll stop there and yeah, leave room for questions.
Thank you so much, Gabriella. That was really helpful. The visuals were amazing. If you, when you have a chance, please forward those visuals to me, and I'll forward them on to anyone who is requesting them, so you don't have to keep track of all the folks asking for them.
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Anything that was particularly helpful for you? Let's see. I don't think anybody was asking earlier. I've been trying to keep track.
I like how people are like, yes, we should question everything.
Yes, Jay, that was a good point. And I really like that you mentioned how we think of understanding policy and having to kind of check that as like, I probably already know this stuff. It's just
Yes.
that I have been made to feel that I don't have the knowledge if I don't take a class on it or.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I just realize how much more, you don't realize how much you know until you start to like make the connections in your own life. Like, why was I treated this way? Why did this happen? So I think it's really important. And it starts with understanding us and systems. And the policy will be able to work on that if we have that.
Right. Allison says, thank you for breaking it down from the beginning. I don't think so. Oh, wait, there are questions in the question part. What are some organizations that are made up of people of color that are looking to work with Black orgs?
So there are a lot of organizations. So I know there's BYP 100. So I'm trying to think of like Black org specifically. We have BYP 100, the Black Youth Project. I believe it's a national organization. We do have a Detroit chapter here, and they work on issues related to what Black folks live with through every day. I know in Detroit, one of the big issues that we're working with is fighting against the Green Light Project. Green Light Project is a surveillance program that racially is incredibly biased, and it sees all Black and brown people the same. So let's say that the police is looking for one specific Black or brown person. It's always usually a man, unfortunately. And what happens is that the system will ID essentially another Black or brown man, and this has been in the New York Times. This has happened, I believe, like at least twice. Is then wrongfully accused of being whoever it is that the cops are searching after. So it doesn't make us safer. It actually it just surveils us and our lives even more in like heavily Black community. So that's an org. Detroit Action is I would say multiracial, but like deeply rooted in Black and brown coalition and work and organizing. And then We the People Michigan, we are multiracial, but we work with a lot of Black and brown organizations in the city of Detroit, in Michigan, and across the country. We work in the movement world, so it's really awesome to be working with people from the Black Lives Matter movements, who are doing a lot of policy, a lot of progressive engagement work right now when it comes to politics and policy. And then the next question that I see here is, do you provide a course on policies that negatively impact POCs? I love that question. I kind of just want to do that. I kind of just want to create a course that negatively impacts people of color. I'm going to make a note of that. So I don't, but policies that negatively, I think that could be a whole course in itself. And thank you for asking that question. I'm actually trying to teach at U of M right now, and this could be one of the things that I argue is like, we're not teaching like undergrads, we're not teaching Masters of Social Work students about policies and how some of them are literally just built to negatively impact our people of color, which is really important. So I don't know of any. I wrote that down. I might do something about that. I think it's really important. But I don't even know like where to point you to, unfortunately, for that. There are some resources. I'll try to get back to that question, but that's a really good question. How can people in the suburbs, get more involved in Detroit or other big cities with support and amplifying the voices of people in the space? That's a good question. And then this next question is, what advice do you have for someone who is trying to get into lobbying or running for political power with little to no people power or support? Also very good questions. So the first one, how can people from the suburbs help us in the cities? I think you're doing a great job by attending this. This is a good first step. There are people who are already doing really important work, and it's supporting their work. Funding, 100%. If you're able to use your pockets, if you're able to fund organizations, please do that. If these, I bet you these places, these cities have progressive candidates, have movement candidates that are learning about these systems that are running for office. So I would also amplify the candidates and their work and support their work through funding. I would talk to your friends in the suburbs what you're learning about. I wouldn't necessarily ask the people from the city to come and present to your people from the suburbs. I've been asked to do that. It's not fun, actually. It's really exhausting, and it feels really unfair when I'm just thrown out after with no actual next steps. So I would suggest that what you learn, what you gather from these spaces, you share with your people to continue the conversation. And then it also really helps to, I think, as a teacher, while you're talking about something, you also like learn it even more. So as you're talking about these issues, like really feel it and let it sink into your values, into your beliefs, and start to shift, again, culture and narratives, because that's what we're up against right now. And then what advice do you have for someone who is trying to get into lobbying or running for political office with little people power or support? I would first start with a little pushback and say that you probably have some support system already. I wouldn't want us to think that we are completely alone. I know that we feel that way. I know that I felt that way. The truth is that if we look up, we might be able to see who's around us. So right here, we have Mothering Justice. This is a support system. So already you have a support system. You have people who can support you. Me, you have my email. I'm an organizer. This is what I do. I love doing this. Reach out to me. I can help you. I could talk through whatever it is that you want to do in supporting you to that. There are other people who you might know in your life that you might want to reach out to them, and realize that we are all people, and a lot of us are pretty approachable. I know for me, I have been told to run for office. I've been told to do all these things, but I would not have been able to do that unless I went and talked to women of color. And I was like, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about your experience? Hey, can you help me navigate this a little bit more? People are out there and they are able to support you. So I don't want you to feel like you don't have it, because you do. If anything, I would encourage you to reach out and to engage with them. And to begin to build, if you don't already have it, which I'm sure you do, but begin to build your village of people who can support you, people who are smarter than you. I'm surrounded by really brilliant, smart people who are way smarter than me, and support, and continue to build that for yourself.
Awesome. All right, let's see. All right, there's people saying they're going to follow up. These are really good. Really good. I really like the focus on taking back what you've learned into the community. That is always my advice to white women when I work with them. And like, yes, they've paid me to work with them, but that work is exhausting. And I don't want to like you take it back and you keep fixing it yourself. Don't make me say this to your best friend after I've already said it to you. Like, I've already done this consultation with you. Now you go and do that work too. And I think it's also empowering to do that work yourself, to see the seeds that you can plant on your own and get that work done, because it's exhausting. You don't want to put all of that weight on one or two people all the time. We all have to do the work.
Mhm.
All right. I'm keeping track of everyone who's asking for the visuals. I'm literally writing down email addresses in case people missed my email. But if you scroll up a little earlier in the chat, you can just send me an email and I'll compile everything probably tomorrow morning while I'm up preparing and send y'all the slides from today. Oh, thank you, Jay. All right. I'm doing a million things at once. All right. So thank you so much, Gabriella. We are at time for this session. And I want to give people a chance to go grab coffee or tea or their lunch because our lunch keynote with Trina Green Brown starts at 12 o'clock. So in 15 minutes. So I'm going to pause our recording here, turn the music back on, let people go grab some food or if it's your lunchtime, because I know some people are on. Hello.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
All right. Okay. Say bye. All right. So thank you to Gabby for her last session. And now we are getting ready to start our lunch keynote. Miss Trina Green Brown will be doing that keynote for us. For those who don't know, Trina Green Brown is the founder of Parenting for Liberation. You guys saying liberated as I'm, okay. In 2018, she was recognized as an inspirational parent, and in 2017 as a Black feminist rising. Trina Green Brown is a leader on the rise, and she's taking Black parents and children along with her to higher heights. As a proud Black feminist mama, activist of two, she founded Parenting for Liberation, a virtual platform with podcasts, blogs, and more for parents of Black children to envision a world where our children are free to be their most liberated selves. Trina also just released a book this year called Parenting for Liberation, and my copy, I think it's by my bed. Thank you, you have your copy. I meant to have mine over here. So make sure you grab your Parenting for Liberation book. It is a great resource with actual activities for you to do and help you free yourself so you can free our children, so we can free our children. Plus, I'm quoted in the book, so I feel special. All right, I am going to turn it over to Trina and find a different playlist for when we move to breakout sessions.
Awesome. Yes, I realize we're chatting and I'm chatting to the panelists and not to the participants. And so I was saying like, yes, liberated to twerk, to dance, to be free in our bodies. Hey y'all, that was a fun way to kind of join the conversation and talk about radical self-care because, you know, sometimes twerking, dancing, moving, popping that thing is a method of self-care. So, you know, all ways of taking care of our bodies is possible. So as Danielle shared, my name is Trina. I use she, her pronouns. I am the founder of Parenting for Liberation, as she shared, author and podcast host. And I'm also a mama of two. One of them is actually here, so he might come in or not, but you know, we will mother and also do the things because that's what we do. And also I should also not be so, we mother, we parent, we caregive. So just to honor all those who are joining in their identities. I'm excited to be here and appreciate Mothering Justice for inviting me to have a conversation about radical self-care. I'm honored to share my thoughts with you. And again, my way of being in practice is that I invite people into practice. I share what I do and that folks are in choice, right? You're liberated about how you engage with this session, what you take that serves you, you take what doesn't serve you and you don't align with, you leave behind. And so I just invite folks to be in choice as they're in the session. So before we get started, I actually want to take some time to ground. I often, like in between sessions or as I enter into spaces, like to kind of just be present to what is. So I'm going to invite folks to ground with me. And grounding, if I were actually outside, I would really like literally touch the ground. So wherever you are, grounding really is about connecting to Mother Earth and feeling her energy pulsating, and letting that energy kind of fuel through you. So I'm putting my feet on the ground, wherever you are, if you can place your feet on the ground and just feel that connection to stillness, to connect to the stillness. And to also, if you can, place your hand on your heart and on your core. Some people call that their gut. Some people call that their center. Some people call it their belly. So I just invite you to place a hand on your core and a hand on your heart, and inviting you to drop into your body and to connect to your breath. And just begin to breathe deeply. And that hand that's on your core will begin to rise as your belly fills with air. And you may feel your hand and notice your hand rising and falling with your breath. And this is just getting us present to what is, to our bodies, to our breath. So as you connect to the earth and feel your feet on the ground, I want us to also acknowledge where we are and upon the lands of the indigenous people of this state, of this country. Sorry. And so I want to acknowledge that I'm here from Southern California, but it is also the land of the Tongva people. And as I say that, even that begins to help me be more present to what is. I'm going to invite you to name wherever you are and acknowledge the land upon which you stand or sit or be. I'm going to invite you to breathe in deeply and call in those folks. Call in our ancestors. Call in our mothers, our grandmothers, our loved ones. Call in our kids. Come on, baby. Call in those for whom we do this work. Thank you, baby. Call in all our love, our descendants, and call in our resistance. Breathe all that in. Know that they are always present and with us, and they support us and guide us in all that we do. Ashe, thank you. Thank you for grounding with me and being present with me. I invited us to ground and to connect with our breath, with our bodies, with our place, to be present to what is. And that is one of my self-care practices. When I feel like out of my body and like all like flustered and I have no connection to what this moment is, I feel like so scattered. I just really try to connect to my body and my breath. Yes. And so just inviting us to be in that practice. And so that's one of my self-care practices. And so now let's just kind of jump into the conversation about what is self-care, the history of it, the origins of it. And I'm actually going to share a slide deck with you all really quickly. Let me get that loaded. So let me see how to do this on Canva. Has this cool way of allowing us to actually share slides, which I could appreciate. All right, let's see. All right, so this workshop is on self-care. You're joining the flight. This is like when the person says like, hey, this is the flight you're on. This is where you're going. This is where you're headed. This is the destination. If you are going to the wrong place, you're definitely welcome to like disconnect, top off. But that's where we're headed, yeah? We did our breathing together. So let's talk about self-care. So self-care is all the craze right now, right? It's very trendy. I looked it up on Instagram the other day, has over 35 million posts about it. And most pictures are like bubble baths and massages and mani-pedis and loofahs, you know, all this me time stuff. And it looks very luxurious than the actual history of self-care. So we're kind of going to go into what are the origins of self-care, and then we're going to talk about radical self-care and how we as a people have practiced self-care in a way that doesn't feel so individualistic. Yeah. And so currently the self-care movement has been co-opted and mainstreamed away from its radical roots. So the term actually, self-care actually originated in the 1950s by doctors in medical institutions who had patients who were institutionalized and wanted them to practice self-care so that they can maintain a sense of self and a sense of self-worth. So that was things like they encouraged their patients who were institutionalized to practice exercising or grooming or to, comb their hair, and, those kind of get dressed every day, right? Instead of staying in there like hospital scrubs. And so the original term and the original practice of self-care came from the medical institution. And though it began in the medical system, we know that the medical system hasn't always cared for Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. And instead, the medical industrial complex, which is what a book, which is a concept that folks should look up. The medical industrial complex shows us that the institutions have actually caused a lot of harm to folks. And there's a long history of disparities in medical treatment for Black folks specifically is what I'm going to lift up. And I know that it's also impacting other folks, right? And so I wanted to lift up some of those struggles in the medical industrial complex that have impacted Black folks. So for years, practitioners, particularly white practitioners, have practiced, experimented, probed, exploited the bodies of Black people. And as early as who we call the godfather of the OBGYN medical practice, I believe his name is Sims. You may have seen in the recent years as folks are dismantling past narratives, you might have seen women, Black women standing in front of statues and pulling them down in medical gowns because the godfather of the OBGYN medical practice actually performed vaginal exams and performed on enslaved Black women without anesthesia, without proper treatment, and actually impacted the lives of many enslaved Black women. And so even that history of us going to get a treatment, a pap smear treatment or a vaginal exam was done by taking advantage of Black women's bodies who were enslaved. And so that is an example early on of the medical industrial complex. We also have the Tuskegee Airmen on your bottom left who were not actually given treatment for syphilis and were withheld treatment as an experiment to see what the impact of syphilis is on their bodies. And so for years they were not given treatment, but they were a part of this study, right? And so how we're thinking that we're getting tested or we're thinking that we're getting treatment and we're not, right? And not even being informed that we're not getting the treatment. And then also, I want to bring attention to Henrietta Lacks. There was actually a film about her that Oprah was in, I think helped produce, a Black woman who in the 1950s visited Johns Hopkins University complaining of vaginal bleeding, and it was found that she had cervical cancer. And so as they took some of her cancer cells through a biopsy, they took them without her knowledge and began to test them. And her DNA was stolen, and it has actually been used to this day for cellular research to treat cancer. And her cells are very popular. They're called HeLa. So it's the first two letters of her first and last name. Those cells have been used time and time again to treat and to learn about cancer. And so her life, her legacy, her body has been used to cure or to find treatment. And that is because they experimented her and collected her cells without her permission. So again, these are just the ways that the medical system has not ever served us, has not often served us. Even to this day and in the past, the forced sterilization of mothers. So you see this poster from back in the day, but that's still happening now, right? We just learned about the forced sterilizations that are taking place in the immigrant detention centers, right? And so for all of these reasons, I often like to go back to the past and understand how we get to where we are. For all of these reasons, Black people and other communities of color have a distrust and a mistrust of the medical industrial complex, understandably so, because there is medical bias results in the many problems that we're experiencing to this day, right? And so you're gonna actually, one of the sessions today during the Mama Summit is around Black maternal mortality and how we have, data has shown that it's not because there's anything, inherently wrong with Black birthing folks, but that it's because of racism within the medical industrial complex. So Black folks have always known that this has not worked for them and the system does not care for them. And so rather than relying on the medical industrial complex, Black folks have begun to create care systems for ourselves and to rely on one another. And that's how the term self-care has entered into this concept of a radical idea of self-care. And so I'm gonna shift to my next slide, which is the Black Panther Party. So the term self-care entered into the civil rights movement in the 1960s, because the Black Panther Party took the term and radicalized it. And now, Black Panther Party is known for, fighting for freedoms, fighting against police brutality, carrying arms. There's a very particular narrative about them, but they also showed up and practiced self and community care. And when we think about self-care for our people, it isn't about individualized or just focused on the self or being selfish. It's about our ability to have self-determination of care, for our community to decide what care looks like for us and to provide that care for one another. And so it's defined by the community in community. And in the radical sense, self-care is really about community care, collective care, and us taking care of ourselves and our people. And so the Black Panther Party had many programs that help provide care for the community. They have programs such as distributing food and groceries to those in need, right? And right now during this pandemic, you hear folks like being able to go pick up bags of food. Like, let's honor the legacy of the Black Panther Party for creating those types of initiatives in the past. The Black Panther Party also created programs like breakfast in schools. And so making sure that young people had access to free breakfast, on their way when they arrived to school. And there's so many schools that are now providing breakfast in the classroom. Let's honor the legacy of the Black Panther Party, right? Let's honor that history of self-care and community care and how they're not interchangeable, but they are reliant upon each other. They also the Panther Party put into practice some real tangible ways of actually thinking about medical treatment, right? Providing vaccines and having a medical clinic with Black health practitioners coming to community and coming together and providing health services for our community, right? And doing that with a commitment to our community, to our community health. And in their 10-point statement, these are just more photos of just the ways that they brought together community and thought about the survival of our community, our body and our soul, right? They're often just framed as, militarized Black folks who just had guns and weapons, but that wasn't the only premise. It was also about us being able to be cared for when the system won't care for us. And so part of their plan, their vision for community care, I wanted to share this slide, is in their 10-point plan. They said we want completely free healthcare for all Black and oppressed people. Health facilities which will not only treat our illnesses, most of which come as a result of oppression, but will also provide us and develop preventative medical programs to guarantee our future survival. And so when we think about self-care and community care, it's about care that actually is not only just me taking a bubble bath, but that is actually also connected to the root cause of so many of our illnesses, which is systems of oppression, racism, and our experiences of microaggressions and our experiences of discrimination, and how the impact of weathering, right? There's a concept of weathering, how actually being Black in the United States actually weathers our bodies, because we're experiencing so much stress and trauma and triggers daily, on a daily basis. That we want medical systems that actually understand the root causes of a lot of our illnesses, which is oppression, and actually will try to prevent the medical issues by interrupting white supremacy within the medical industrial complex, right? And so this is the Black Panthers Party legacy of radicalizing care for us as a people. And that has definitely impacted and shaped the way that I do my work with Parenting for Liberation. Right, and also want to honor that that legacy continues, right? Those acts of community care continues, and Audre Lorde guides a lot of the work that I do, and she's a Black queer feminist writer and activist, and she wrote about how those acts of survival were radical, right? And so oftentimes folks bring this quote out when we're talking about self-care. It's about survival. Audre Lorde is often quoted saying this in her book, A Burst of Light. She wrote the sentence that has become like a manifesto for self-care amongst Black women and Black folks that says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And so when we think about political warfare, and as you today and tomorrow learn about and explore politics and policies through the Mama Summit, I want you to remember that caring for yourself is also a political act. It is an act of resistance. In a society that is filled with messages that certain types of people's lives don't matter. This is the kind of care, this care as a political act is the kind that contradicts those narratives that our lives don't matter and reaffirms, heals, and fuels Black folks to continue doing the work of overturning oppressive systems and strengthening our communities. So caring for ourselves literally is an act of political warfare. And many of the policies you'll learn about today, whether it be around Black maternal health or COVID relief or childcare support, these are all care-related policies. These are all policies that are about how do we care for ourselves? How do we get the government, how do we get the institutions to provide care systems and care support for us as a people? And so these are all related to our caring. So again, this is political. Being able to provide care for ourselves, our children, is political. And so while we're talking about care in that way, I wanted to share a little bit about some of the ways that Parents for Liberation has been thinking about how do we provide care for our own people? How do we build upon the legacy of the Panther Party and of folks like Audre Lorde, who said that this is a political act? And so we really try to bring together Black parents, caregivers, and support them. So we had a caregivers fund, a care for caregivers, because the question is, caregivers are giving all their care and support to our children, to the next generation, but who gives care to the caregivers? Who even cares about the caregivers? And I know that when we care about our people, so the Care for Caregivers Fund actually provided supports for Black caregivers to actually receive free one-on-one healing sessions, whether that be Reiki or coaching or counseling or therapy or just provided a multitude, would that be sound healing, right? And so we provided a multitude of healing practitioners, all who were Black and many of whom identified as caregivers as well, right? So there's the way of like recycling and reinvesting in Black caregivers. So partnering with Black caregivers, Black healers, partnering with Black healers who provided care. We resource those healers who may have been, out of work because of COVID. We resource them with being able to pay for their time and their healing work, and then we partnered them and gave those sessions and provided them for Black parents and caregivers who just needed space to be caring for themselves. We also bring folks together. So we had a Black Mama Magic kind of gathering of self-care and community care, because at that session, we created together, we made our own, body scrubs, and we actually spoke life into one another. So we had, Black mamas coming together and also giving one another care. So taking one another's hands and providing, doing a little hand massage and affirming their life and speaking into their life. And even that ability to just we're gonna make our own healthcare treatment, but we're also going to speak into the life of another mama and affirm her. And so just thinking about the ways that we can exchange care, how we can support each other. Assata is often quoted that we must love and support one another. And so how do we provide care for one another? And so that's some of the work that Parenting for Liberation has been doing on the collective front. And we've also virtually, COVID, we can't come together, we can't be in person, but virtually we've been bringing families together and doing community care circles once a month, whether it be coming together and learning how to build an altar during this time, whether it be coming together and reading books with our children. So reading books around, Young, Gifted, and Black. So having the author of Young, Gifted, and Black, Jamia Wilson, come and read and speak life into our babies, right? And so that's some of the ways that we've been practicing self-care and community care through Parenting for Liberation. And the other way, I think Danielle mentioned, is that I just wrote a book, and the whole beginning of the book is also called Parenting for Liberation. The whole first section of the book is about the self. Like, how can we as parents first take care of ourselves, support ourselves, heal ourselves, so that we can show up as more liberated parents. And so one of the stories in the book is how do you water your creativity as a way to plant seeds for your own healing? And so this is a quote from one of the stories in the book by Gina Holiday, who I interviewed, and she shares some incredible practices about caring for ourselves through our creativity. She says, sometimes motherhood is going to be really tough, and you're not going to feel like you have time for creativity. But if you can continue to water it, it can grow into something even greater. And so how do we continue to water ourselves, nurture ourselves, invest in ourselves? And so the questions that I wanted to explore with you is, how do you water yourselves? How do you nurture yourselves? How do you care for yourselves? And how do you create your own politic and your own policies for yourself about caring for yourself? Yeah. It has to be just as important as all the policies you're going to learn today. All of the policies you're going to learn about. How do you also create a politic of care for yourself as a radical act is what I'm inviting you to reflect on. And just to kind of bring in a mother's voice about why it's so important. This mother is an activist. Her name is Nikki Patton. She was at a self-care workshop, and she was working at the time with Black Women's Blueprint. And she wrote this in dedication to herself and her son. And the poem is called "Put on Your Own Oxygen Mask First." And when I think about this, we haven't been able to travel lately, but they often say, you know, the pilot, when we started, I said, you know, you're on the flight for radical self-care. Is this the flight that you want to be on? Did you sign up, right? That's one of the first announcements. And then one of the other announcements is, like, in case of an emergency, you know, if we lose oxygen pressure, masks will drop down from the ceiling of the plane. And, you know, they say to put on your own oxygen mask first, and then help those next to you, then help small children and the elderly. And as a parent, our kind of orientation is that we need to put the mask on our kids first and then ourselves second. And the poem is really that we have to model caring for our children. We have to care for ourselves so that we can actually be here to care for our children, right? We shouldn't martyr for them. And so I'm going to read this poem that she created, because I just feel like it's really important to hear from the voice of another Black mother who knows the importance of caring for ourselves as a political act and to show our babies. And so the poem says, "Put on your own oxygen mask first. Seriously. Save yourself first. Be a model of salvation. Show, don't tell, caring. Show your beauty to yourself so that he can learn how to show beauty to himself. Show him how to breathe by breathing. Show him how to save himself through saving yourself. Show him how to care through caring for yourself and him. Do not martyr yourself to your child. Warrior for him by fighting for yourself. Put your own mask on." So I just want to affirm those words by Nikki, and just wanting us to just pause, right? And we did some breathing in the beginning. I want to invite us, like, literally in this moment, visualize yourself putting that oxygen mask on yourself. And right now, like, the conversation around breath and air and our ability to breathe is so tense, right? With COVID taking our breath away, with law enforcement, you know, putting their knees literally on our necks and stealing our breath away from us, right? This idea, this concept of breath is so sacred. And so how do we make sure that we put our own oxygen mask on so that we can warrior for our children by fighting for ourselves? And so with that, I actually want to invite folks into, I know folks are online and may have access to the chat. I'm curious if folks could share, or I don't know, we're almost at the Q&A section, but wanting to invite folks in the chat or some way to really reflect on, how are you putting on your own oxygen mask? How are you doing that for yourself?
I want to take one quick moment before we do this part to let everyone know that this was actually the question I was going to ask for the giveaway, but Trina already did it. So we will be giving away a copy of Trina's book to the person or a person who answers this question. I literally wrote that down as the question I was going to use. So you will get your own copy of Parenting for Liberation by answering this question. We'll pick somebody randomly from the chat. All right, Ebony Mixon says, by not allowing self-care to cause mom guilt.
Oof. Ashe. That is so true, Ebony. Thank you for sharing that. So often when we do create space for care, we spend a lot of that time judging ourselves and feeling guilty that we don't even enjoy it. Don't even enjoy it. So I definitely resonates. How do we see this as not something to feel guilty about, and actually see it as in service of our children? Because when we are cared for, when we have the space to care for ourselves, we are better equipped to be able to care for them. I see Lene in the chat who says, utilizing therapy to handle my own emotional issues so that my children don't suffer for them. Ashe, that healing is so important. That is so good, Lene. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Danielle is taking a weekend to go to an Airbnb with 2 of her girls. No children, no partners allowed. Yes, that's amazing. To create that time to get away is so important. And I know we're almost at time, but I also wanted to share these this piece of, I've been reflecting on these quadrants of care. Let's see if they stay on the screen. These quadrants of care, right? So here's some examples. Here's some ideas that I have been thinking about. Like if we care for our, sorry guys. Things that we can do to care for our bodies, things that we can do to care for our hearts, things that we can do to care for our minds, and things that we can do to care for our spirit. Yeah, so there's multiple ways that we can care for ourselves. And so caring for our bodies are our physical care, eating nourishing foods, moving our body. When we first started, there was a song playing and I was like, it's okay, twerking is important. That's a self-care practice. Go ahead, shake that thing. Moving our bodies, doing some energy work, Reiki, massage, moving the trauma, the stress that's in our bodies. Again, the weathering on our bodies. How do we move that through our bodies? Through somatic work. Our mental care. Definitely stop watching the news. If it's too much, step away from it. Talking to someone, therapy, journaling, reflecting, taking a mental health day or break, affirming yourself, saying affirmations. Emotional care. Crying when you feel the feelings. Feel all the feelings. Embrace your feelings. Express joy. Laugh. Caring for your own heart. Like, are there medicines? Are there herbs? Are there teas? Are there oils? Are there things that you can do to actually help uplift your emotional vibrations? And then spiritually, prayers, meditation, altar practice, connecting with your ancestors, connecting with the higher spirit. These are some of the ways that you can care for your mind, bodies, and spirits. And I love still seeing some of the things in the chat about investing in self, investing in our health, education, and growth. That was Tyra. And I also see Allison saying knitting. I actually learned a little bit of crochet during COVID, right? A knitting project just for you, just making it beautiful. It doesn't necessarily have to be just useful. It can be beautiful as well. So yeah, thank you for this time. I have more slides, but I think I'm running out of time. I definitely want to invite folks to check out this video at some point of, actually, we'll just go there. These are the ways that you can connect to Parenting for Liberation. And with that, I'll pause and turn it back to Danielle.
All right. Thank you so much for that beautiful keynote and this reminder of